Okay, I'm reading the book of Romans, chapter 8. We're thinking about Christ in heaven. And it says from verse 31, "What can we ever say to such wonderful things as these? If God is on our side, who can ever be against us? Since he did not spare even his own son for us, but gave him up for us all, won't he also surely give us everything else? Who dares accuse us, whom God has chosen for his own? Will God? No. He is the one who has forgiven us and given us right standing with himself. Who then will condemn us? Will Christ? No, for he is the one who died for us and came back to life again for us and is sitting in the place of highest honour next to God, pleading for us there in heaven." The book of Romans tells us about our assurance of salvation with God. The whole book of Romans is telling us it's not about what we do, but all about what God has done. Salvation is a free gift. We belong to Christ. He's done it all for us. How do we know we belong to Christ? Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 12:3 that we can't say, "Jesus be cursed," but neither can we say, if we belong to him, "Jesus is Lord," unless the Spirit is in us, prompting us. If you remember Jesus in Matthew chapter 16 on the way to Caesarea Philippi, he says to his disciples, "Who do the people say the Son of Man is?" And they say, "Well, some say he's John the Baptist come back to life. Some say he's Elijah or one of the other prophets." And then Peter stands up and says, when Jesus says, "Who do you say I am?" Peter says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus affirms that title and says, "Yes, Peter, this was not given to you by human wisdom, but a revelation from God." But notice what happens straight away afterwards. Jesus tells his disciples that he has to suffer at the hands of the unrighteous, but he will die, but will be raised from the dead. And immediately Peter rebukes him, speaking not this time through the Spirit, but from the flesh, says this can never happen. And Jesus rebukes Satan, who he knows is speaking through Peter. So the next thing we need to look at is the fact that suffering is part of what Christ had to go through and what we will have to go through as well. Paul uses the passages that we call the servant songs in Isaiah 51 to 53, the suffering servant. And Jesus calls us to follow him and says that we may have to suffer too. We can look at Matthew 10:16 and following. That we must take up our cross, be prepared to suffer for him and for the gospel. So, when you became a believer, you not only died to sin and became alive in Christ, but you also stopped being a citizen of this world and its ways and became a citizen of a heavenly kingdom. If you remember, originally God created the world as a perfect place, and he gave man dominion over his creation. But when Satan tempted Eve and Adam fell, Adam gave that dominion over to Satan. And as a result, the whole of creation was affected by sin. The whole of creation is in a state of death and decay. Sickness, pestilence, famine, war, all things we're familiar with today were not part of God's original plan. So it's not just human beings who are in need of salvation, but Paul tells us the whole of creation waits for the day when sin will be no more and creation will be put right again. In the meantime, God uses some of these trials and tribulations to try and bring us to perfection. Those trials might bring us patience, and the patience brings character, and that character brings further trust in God. But thirdly, there is ultimate glory. You need to doubt your doubts. Do you ever have that niggling feeling, that voice in your head that says, "You did it again. Call yourself a Christian"? Paul makes it clear that out of his love for us, he has justified us before God. We can be confident then that he will follow through and bring us to glory. 8:30 and 33. Who, Paul asks, is going to accuse us if God chose us for himself and Jesus, who gave his life for us, intercedes for us in heaven? We know the accuser is Satan, who, like with Peter, tries to get us to think and act out of the flesh and then tries to condemn us. But there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ. So confident is Paul of what God has done through Christ that he ends the chapter by admitting that while we may face hardships and be tempted, or we may face accusations from within and from without, victory is ours through Christ who loves us, and that nothing can separate us from the love of God shown in Christ who died for us.